follow your heart, trust your gut. Pun totally intended for this gut health related podcast, by the way. But is there like a little asterisk next to the statement? Should you follow your heart, except for certain situations? Trust your gut, trust your instinct, except for certain situations. Well, that's what we're going to be talking about here today on the IBS Freedom Podcast. So, hello, Amy, my large and in charge, very pregnant friend.
Yes.
As of the filming of this.
I am very large now. I'm getting to the point where, like, my bigger t-shirts I have, there's still a little something hanging out. And I've had to retire some of the shirts I've been wearing just because it's like, oh, there's a little too much hanging out. If it's like a little bit, I'm okay with.
I feel like midriff shirts are back in though. So you're just
I don't know for
fashionista.
pregnant people, but
Yeah.
I get. But they should be for pregnant people because it's that would make life easier. Maybe I'll just start wearing like a sports bra or something. Although, what's so weird about this pregnancy too is I feel like my boobs are bigger than they were last pregnancy and even breastfeeding.
We're just getting right into the TMI in this episode.
I know, but it's like so wild to me because I've had like dresses that I wore last pregnancy I like can't wear because they don't fit my boobs right. And I'm like, well, I wore them at this stage of last pregnancy. Like, why are my boobs just huge this time? Maybe they just got big because of my 1 mega boob last time who was working overtime to feed Cece. In case anyone didn't realize, I don't know if we talked about this or not.
Tag us on Instagram, #megaboob.
Yeah, man, exactly. But Cece only drank from 1 boob from like 4 months to a year old. She just wouldn't drink the left side anymore. So we had 1 mega boob on the right side and my left boob just shriveled right up.
Like a raisin.
Yeah, exactly like a raisin.
Oh,
but yeah,
my gosh.
this pregnancy, I always feel like a little bit when you get to the stage, it's like an orangutan at the zoo where it's just like your boobs are just sitting on your belly and you're just ready to get the baby out. So
you're kind of waddling a little bit.
Right. You're waddling, your back hurts. You're kind of like having to shift and get into weird positions. It is like orangutan-like. I don't know.
Oh, goodness. Well, and it's fitting since you have orange hair too.
It's
so
true.
that's in keeping. I mean, if you were this severely pregnant at Halloween, I would say that you should be an orangutan for Halloween.
Oh my God.
But I pray to God the kid comes out before then because your due date is the end of September.
That would be miserable, but yes. I always love the people whose like birthdays, like 2 weeks after the due date, and they're like, well, maybe it'll be born on my birthday. And I'm just like, no, Grandpa, I don't want it born on your birthday. That's 2.5 weeks after my due date. So I hope not. But yeah, it's funny. I don't know.
Yeah. Meanwhile, my kid was almost 3 weeks late.
I know, which is insane.
Like 2 weeks and 5 days late, I think.
Oh my God.
From her projected hypothetical due date that they
That's
totally
wild.
got wrong.
What was her weight?
She was normal size. She was 7 pounds, 14 ounces. There is no way that child was 3 weeks overdue.
Yeah.
They just got the due date wrong.
Cece was 7 pounds, almost 10 ounces. And she was like 2 days late. So 2 days late. So I would think that, right.
Yeah.
So
air quotes. Well, by the time this episode airs, we all pray that this baby has come out of you.
Oh, yeah. And you'll be reminiscing about the mega boob and all the stuff.
Exactly.
Orangutan.
Yep. And I know because you did this with Cece a little bit. So if you want to see squishy baby photos, make sure you follow Amy on Instagram and maybe she will grace us with a couple of Instagram stories of squishy new baby girl.
Oh,
so tell good people where to find you on Instagram.
Yeah. Amy _ Hollenkamp _ RD.
It's your name.
I know.
Yes. So cute squishy baby photos. Go follow Amy. No cute squishy baby fit photos, but I do occasionally post pictures from when I'm foraging and out in the woods. So like the other day, I posted a funnel web spider, which was kind of neat. And then some pretty flowers. And I took a funny picture of a squirrel who was in a goofy position. So if you want more of like the nature vibe in my Instagram stories, I can be found at gut.microbiome.queen on both Instagram and YouTube. So look, we got a little plug for ourselves right out the get-go. But let's get back to the topic at hand, which is this idea of following your gut, following your instinct, following your heart, and where there are situations where that's going to be either very difficult to do or it would not be advisable to do that. Do you want to give away the little mystery and say, like, when is it going to be difficult to follow your gut and when should you maybe not follow your gut? And let's start picking that apart.
Well, I mean, I think in general, the people we work with have been on this journey for so long. And I feel like there's probably lack of trust building the longer maybe they haven't seen success. So I think the longer you've struggled with gut issues, and by no means does that make you someone that I don't think can get better, because I work with so many people that have had gut issues for a long time. A lot of times it's just not the right strategies. So again, I think it's tricky when someone's tried different things, and usually I find that people try the same things in different flavors. You know, they'll try
like antimicrobials,
right? They'll try.
People have tried 20 different products, but they're doing the same action every time. They're trying a new antimicrobial.
Right. It's like these built-in protocols. They'll go to 3 or 4 practitioners that all have a SIBO protocol or all have an IBS design protocol or whatever, and it's all fairly similar. And again, it can make you feel very defeated. You've wasted it can feel like, oh, I wasted a lot of time, energy, money on these strategies that aren't working. And it can make you feel, I think it's easy to start having more and more doubts when you've been in that scenario where it's like, oh man, can I get better? Can I move forward? How do I build trust back in my gut again? Can my gut build resiliency? It's like all these doubts that I think come in. And that's where I think a lot of people can get stuck in like more of an anxiety state of like, oh, I just won't get better.
And you touched, you came to the point that I was going to make. Just you had some good points along the way. So I was going to say, I think that the people who are A, going to have a hard time listening to their gut, and B, it might not even be advisable to tell them to trust their gut, is somebody with more anxiety, more like hypervigilance kind of stuff going on, and more like OCD-ish obsessive tendencies happening. But I think you're right. I think that also the longer you've been at this journey and the harder you've worked and the more you have that perception of like, I've tried everything and nothing works, I think it's going to be really hard to trust your body and listen to your body, because there's probably some internal dialogue of like, my body's broken, I'm sick, there's something wrong with me, I have a disease, I'm never going to get better. And there's probably some internal chatter as a part of that kind of longstanding traumatic experience that's going to cloud your judgment. So you make an excellent point.
Well, and I think like from the anxiety angle too, the way I've heard some of my favorite like anxiety folks talk about this too is not that you can't still trust that you can move forward and trust there's a way out, but it's more like having trust despite the doubts. So I think the way they often describe it is that a lot of people want certainty. So they want to come work with us, but they want to know that we have a 100% success rate, which is not true. But, you know, we get the people that'll ask us like, what's your success rate percentage? And it's like, well, that depends on so many factors. And we can't give you 100% certainty that we're going to be able to help you.
And test results are not going to give you 100% certainty, even though they are marketed to make you believe that they will. But we've done some recent episodes on stool testing and false positive testing in general that you could check out if you want more context for that.
Yeah. So I think the key difference is that a lot of people with anxiety want to trust, but only if they have 100% certainty, which just isn't realistic. So it's like being able to trust that their gut can get better and build resilience, even though they have all these doubts and fears that are coming up of like, can I get better? And not kind of getting wrapped up in those or giving those tons of attention and focus. And instead staying focused on the things that can start pushing the needle, like staying focused, like eye on the prize on, again, a lot of the unsexy basics that we always talk about, and just trusting that in time those will manifest without getting so caught up in some of these fears and doubts that come up. So I think that to me, that's the difference with being able to build trust with someone that has anxiety. I think it totally can be done, but people with anxiety have much harder times taking like a leap of faith because they want certainty.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in that case, you could almost define anxiety as a strong desire to not take that leap. Right. Again, like the leap is scary.
And they oftentimes refer to like OCD, and I think anxiety falls in this, as like a doubt disorder. So it's like you just get caught up in the doubts instead of like maybe overwhelming evidence that you can get better, that you can build resilience, but there are still doubts along the way. And again, I think the goal is not necessarily to say, don't have doubts, because then you're going to like probably have more doubts. It's that like, oh yeah, those doubts are just a part of the journey. And how you respond to the doubts and how you push forward and how you focus your time and energy is going to help you continue to build trust and continue to let go of some of the doubts.
I like that. And I think another thing that just popped in my head also is maybe you don't need 100% certainty in the thing that you're about to do or the outcome that you're hoping to get from the thing you're about to do, but maybe approach it from a mindset of, but I am certain that I will get through whatever happens. Right. So I'm picturing a scenario where it's like, okay, I'm thinking about introducing a new food or a group of foods, and I'm really, really scared. And I don't know what's going to happen. Like, there's no way that you or your practitioner or we here on this podcast can tell you with 100% certainty that reintroducing carbs is going to go perfectly and smoothly and it's going to be all rainbows. But if you can have faith in yourself and your body, that even if you have a bad reaction to that food, or even if it's not the desired outcome, you will be fine anyway. Like, you'll kind of, you'll get there when you get there, and you'll like assess and figure out how to navigate once you're there. I think maybe that's the difference versus, like you said, I think people want 100% certainty that the supplement is going to be perfectly well tolerated. Mm-hmm. The food is going to be tolerated. The gadget that they are purchasing is going to be like worth it, and it's going to immediately pay them back. Like, I'm picturing if somebody bought like an Oura ring or, some tech health related gadget, it's like they want to know for sure it's going to be the right thing or it's going to be helpful for them. But it's like, you'll get through whatever you get through, and having faith in yourself and like the flexibility to have faith in yourself no matter what happens, even if the unwanted outcome does transpire. Maybe that's the framework.
Yeah. Well, and I think that again, it's building tolerance to uncertainty and even like discomfort physically if you don't react well. But I think what you're describing too is the difference between like a long-term mindset that's probably more like values or goals based versus like maybe short-term mindset too, where it's like, ooh, I don't want any discomfort or any symptoms when I add new foods in. And that's just kind of an unrealistic probably mindset to have, of like, you'd have no adaptations or no transitional responses to changing up your diet, or maybe working out at the gym again, or like sometimes you can get sore if you're building muscle. similarly, again, if you're building strength and pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, there could be mental, physical discomfort that comes along with that. So it's being okay and knowing like you have the resiliency to be able to overcome that and to just move through it. The other thing that I think is important when we're talking about trust, because I know you had mentioned it with like testing and how testing feels like a way to build trust and to know exactly what you're going after. Or again, even a provider saying, I have a 100% success rate or something, which again would always be a red flag for me if someone said that. But, a provider that's very reassuring or whatever. These are things that I think are a little external too, that might feel like they're building trust and confidence that really aren't. I don't know how else to say that. But sometimes, again, like true confidence building and trust building, I think is more internal. And having some reassurance and faith in your provider and having some testing, I think makes sense. But if you're constantly seeking out reassurance from testing and you're doing like tons of testing, you're constantly seeking out like new providers with different perspectives to give you reassurance, like that's also a red flag that maybe you need to do some internal work to build some trust within yourself versus looking for building trust from external sources that I don't think is going to do it.
Well, it kind of reminds me of conversations we had with the OCD episodes. And I think I shared a case of a woman that I had worked with. And we talked about this idea of like constantly seeking reassurance from outside forces, like other people or providers, is a sign of some like OCD kind of stuff going on. And it feels like the right thing to do. And it feels like the compassionate, empathetic thing to do to offer that person reassurance when they ask for it. But the best thing you could do for them from like an OCD perspective is to not give them that reassurance. So like I had a patient and every single interaction we had, whether it was in the patient portal or an appointment or her clarity worksheet that she filled out before the appointments, every single interaction she would ask, are you really sure you can help me? Are you really sure I could get better? And I'm not like, it just occurred to me that like my facial expressions probably made me sound like such an asshole. I'm not trying to pick her apart, but what I'm saying is it was this big thing every time we interacted. And it wasn't until after we stopped working together and we talked about OCD and really did a deep dive on that I realized, oh, I was probably not doing her any favors giving her the reassurance every time she asked for it. Right. Over the course of however many appointments we had, she probably asked for reassurance. Do you really think I could get better? Do you really think you can help me? Are you sure I'm not too far gone? Am I still like savable? She probably did that at least 40 or 50 times. And I gave her the reassurance, but now I realize, oh, I probably should have recognized that for what it was and had more of a conversation. I think I might have touched on it really briefly once and pointed out like, hey, have you noticed that you do this every time we meet? And like, I think I said at the time, it was like, I'll give you the reassurance when you ask, and I'll still give you my honest opinion when you ask. But like, I just wanted to point this pattern out to you. I don't know if you recognized it.
Yeah. I think the way I've heard it again from like OCD anxiety therapists is like, it's not bad to give someone reassurance, especially if you're working with a new provider, at least initially, and be like, oh yeah, like this makes total sense. This is what I'm seeing. Like I'm confident that I can help. And so you do that. I remember one of my first conversations with working one-on-one for OCD stuff, telling kind of my story, and the therapist saying like, that's the most OCD thing I've heard. Or like, that's like textbook OCD. She said something along those lines. And I'm like, oh, that's like nice, like, and confirming and validating. But when you need, again, the reassurance constantly, it's like, it's actually probably creating more anxiety around whatever you're wanting reassurance around. It's making it a much bigger difference. Yeah, it's scratching the itch, as Nikki is demonstrating. But it's not really getting to the heart of the matter, or building your resilience to the doubts that are coming up that are leading to the need for reassurance. Because they're not really going to go anywhere, and they're probably only going to get louder the more you're seeking out reassurance from everyone around you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like itching a mosquito bite. It feels really freaking good in the moment, but then the minute you stop itching, the itch intensifies tenfold. So the ultimate solution is to stop scratching the damn bug bite and leave it alone so it can heal. But again, it's like when you get the reassurance in that moment, it can feel really good, but then it's like the doubt and the uncertainty is magnified that much more.
Right.
Because now it's like you've taught your brain that it's okay to seek that, and you get like a little, dopamine hit, and you get some reassurance every time you seek that in somebody else rather than yourself.
Right. Right. And again, it reinforces and like you said, magnifies this idea that that's a really important thing that you need to focus on. It's really dangerous. It's telling you this message of like, you're never going to get better is so dangerous, instead of looking at it like, oh yeah, I do have a fear of that. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that you have a core fear of that. But again, the more you put attention on it, and it's going to be loud when you try to ignore it. That's usually what happens. It's like a toddler at a Target who's not getting the toy that it wants, and it's like, me, I need that toy. And again, it usually gets louder and amplifies, and then it usually kind of comes down the more you kind of invest your energy and attention somewhere else. Yeah. But yeah, it's super tricky, I think, when there is a degree of anxiety involved to like build trust back up. And I think it's going to take time, but I think you certainly can build trust. It's just a matter of doing that, even if you have doubts.
Yeah. Well, I think doing things, even if they make you nervous, or even if you're not 100% certain, like the action speaks louder than words, right? Like we've heard that expression growing up. So if you show your body that you're brave enough to introduce the new food, or go to the social gathering, or try the new supplement, or try the probiotic, or whatever it might be, I feel like the body starts to listen to that after a while. But, I think there's so much kind of folded in here. I think I just saw this on Instagram not the other day, and it was a reel, and the person was saying, your anxiety is lying to you. Your depression is lying to you. And I thought that was worthy of mentioning in this episode, because again, what I think is the challenge here is that the vast majority of people that we work with in like the IBS, SIBO, functional GI kind of space, the vast majority of those people have anxiety or OCD or hypervigilant tendencies. Now, which came first, the chicken or the egg? I'm not going to make this episode about did the anxiety cause the IBS or the other way around, but the point remains that the anxiety is still there, and it's still affecting your body and your decision making. So, but that idea that like the anxiety is lying to you is kind of an interesting one to noodle on. And I will say, I think also eating disorders is another group of folks who probably need to relearn this idea of trusting their instinct or trusting their gut, because their internal dialogue has been misleading them for so long. Like you think of an anorexic patient with body dysmorphia, and they are stick thin, but they see themselves as fat. Like that's a great example of the brain and the anxiety and the eating disorder lying to that person.
Look, for instance, too, like in the gut space, using kind of a similar analogy, it's like, how many times do we work with someone who's like, I can't tolerate all these foods, and they can tolerate way more than they think they can. That doesn't mean they don't have like a few triggers or something. But it's usually not this broad list of things. It's like, if they have triggers, maybe it's more narrow. So again, it's like, ooh, I have this idea in my head. I can't tolerate all these foods. But in reality, you can. Like you said, it's the anxiety kind of plant seeds that are harder to overcome. And one thing too that, a lot of work I've done like on the anxiety OCD space, that's helpful for me is sometimes, and I agree to your point, that action is so important. So action is what's probably going to build trust, but it's going to be really scary at first. But one thing that I know Jenna Overball talks about is that when you start doing actions that, are against maybe what your anxiety is telling you to do, it feels very, very irresponsible. It's kind of like the word that she uses. Like it feels, again, dangerous or irresponsible. And that might, in a way, be like a good metric to a degree. And you could maybe label it as going outside your comfort zone. But sometimes it feels like, again, almost irresponsible of like, oh man, I'm going to eat foods that are dangerous for me. That feels irresponsible. Even though logically you might be able to work out like, I've been restrictive, but still haven't gotten better. But the doubts are so strong that you will almost maintain the status quo because it feels safer than doing kind of the dangerous thing of adding foods in.
And I have something to add to that perhaps too, is like when we are creating these beliefs in our heads, right? Like gluten is inflammatory, sugar is inflammatory, whatever the case may be. It's interesting to look at it from this standpoint and ask, is that 100% true for 100% of people?
Right.
And like, so for example, you might have a family with celiac genes, like my mom's side of the family. I guarantee it's the celiac genes on that side. You might have a family with more of a predilection towards autoimmunity or certain diseases or certain food sensitivities. You might have selected a cohort of friends that share similar interests, and one of those interests is in the way they eat, right? So like, I remember when I first moved away from school and I was in like my first kind of adult ecosystem where I had to make friends as a grown-up without school, I would go to meetup.com meetings and I picked groups that like aligned with some sort of value or belief that I had. So I would go to the paleo meetup group, the vegan meetup group, I shared this, I think last time, the freaks at the table, avoiding 8 million different foods meetup groups. And, so it's like, you might not have realized it, but you might have created this pocket of reality that confirms your existing beliefs and biases. And, or like, maybe you're super into like homesteading, and maybe all of the homesteaders are like, they're all drinking raw milk and they're all anti-sugar or whatever it is. And so it's almost like in this exercise, if you ask, is this 100% true for 100% of people? You have to zoom out to the world at large. So for example, looking at gluten, I'm sure you know people who have trouble eating gluten, and like maybe a lot of people in your life do, but are there people on planet Earth who are able to eat gluten and they're reasonably healthy and they feel fine on a day-to-day basis? The answer is absolutely resoundingly yes. And same thing, like, are there people on planet Earth who are able to eat some sugar and maintain some degree of function and health? Yes. So, you can kind of poke holes at this, but like, I'm picturing if somebody had a belief that people with SIBO can't take probiotics because it's going to add bacteria on top of bacteria, right? Like the bullshit Mark Pimentel kind of model of probiotics with SIBO. But are there people out there with SIBO who are able to tolerate probiotics, or that probiotics have actually helped? Yes, I will tell you from my clinical experience and Amy's clinical experience and PubMed, there are numerous research articles that prove that at least some people with SIBO can tolerate probiotics. So anyway, that could be one little exercise or filter to try to suss out, like, is the belief or the thought that I'm having right now actually totally true, or is it maybe running through some bullshit filters in my brain, and like, can I trust this information, I guess.
Well, and I even think to a degree, sometimes too, if you've been operating from the same belief system for a long time and that hasn't served you, it's like, is this belief actually serving me right now? You know, maybe low FODMAP was helpful at the beginning, but now you've been on it for 2 years. Like, is my belief thinking like I need to be on low FODMAP forever? Is that belief really serving me at this particular point in time? Do I need to try something new? And I think that that's honestly sometimes a helpful way to change your frame of thinking too, because so many people we've worked with are just spinning their wheels doing the same thing. And it's like, this hasn't worked. And you've been maybe ruminating or trying different protocols that are similar flavors, like we've said. You're trying kind of similar things over and over again, even though they might be slight differences. Like this way of thinking of like, I need to kill the bacteria, I need to starve the bacteria. Has that really been serving you lately? And again, a lot of times the people we work with, by the time they find us, it isn't. So even just kind of reminding yourself of that, of, you know, the things I have been doing haven't been working. I need to try something a little different. And I need to experiment, and that can build trust across time. So yeah, I mean, I think that just acknowledging that what you have been doing isn't working. So maybe the beliefs behind the steps you've taken might be false.
Yeah, I think that's valid. Another thought too, and I want to start segueing us into action. Like, okay, I think we've painted the problem and the reasons why anxiety and OCD and like eating disorders and a lengthier health battle, like why those things can make it difficult to trust your gut. But let's pivot into some strategies that I think could be helpful for folks. I think one that I'm going to throw out there, and it's going to reference some older episodes for us, a few back. I think if you can go and do a little bit of a deep dive on the gut-brain axis and the vagus nerve specifically, and start looking at things that are good for the vagus nerve and things that the vagus nerve needs to be healthy, and start doing more like vagus nerve work, I think that will help. And here's why I'm building this hypothesis. And again, we have an entire episode on the gut-brain axis. We have another whole episode on the vagus nerve itself, maybe 10 or 20 episodes ago, so moderately recently. But part of vagal tone is related to what's called interoception. And interoception is basically your ability to correctly feel and interpret your internal body cues. So something like hunger or satiety, aka fullness, or, fatigue versus having good energy, or, period cramps or whatever it might be. But it's basically your ability to sense and make use of the information coming from your internal body. And that's a big part of this, is like, if you can learn to really sense and observe these things correctly and then make correct inferences from that information, that's part of this whole trust your gut thing that we're talking about, I think. But one of the things I want to point out with the vagus nerve, and I'm sure I mentioned this in that episode that we did not that long ago, was there's this idea that was painted in a research article, and I'm going to give you the title of the PubMed ID in case people want to read it. It's an excellent article, and the PubMed ID is 208-51735. And the title is the title is Upward Spirals of the Heart, Autonomic Flexibility as Indexed by Vagal Tone, Reciprocally and Prospectively Predicts Positive Emotions and Social Connectedness. So basically what they looked at in this study was they were saying that having higher vagal tone is conducive to better social skills and better social interactions. So if you have good vagal tone, you're going to come off to other people as friendly and warm and somebody that they want to be around. And it's going to make you more outgoing, and it's going to make you like want to connect with other people more. So having good vagal tone helps you make connections and helps you be more social. And likewise, having better social connections and promoting the feelings of connectedness and safety and community stimulates your vagus nerve. So what they proposed in this and why they titled it Upward Spirals of the Heart is that if you can stimulate the vagus nerve a little bit with a little bit of socializing, a little bit of connectedness, a little bit of like meditation or time in the woods or time in nature, if you can stimulate the vagus nerve a little bit, you're going to get better vagal tone, and that it's going to make it that much easier the next time you want to do something for the vagus nerve, like socializing or meditating. And then so you stimulate the vagus nerve again, and that fires up that pathway. And you see, so it's like you do the activity and you get the vagal tone, and then you do the activity and then you get more vagal tone. And then that vagal tone makes it easier to do the activity again. And now you get more vagal tone, and it's an upward spiral. It's like the opposite of the snowball rolling down the hill kind of effect.
Right.
And so that's what I encourage my students to do in FODMAP Freedom. I'm like, look, I'm not saying that you have to book like a 2-week cruise to Alaska with your entire neighborhood. I'm just saying maybe call a friend and just have a nice phone conversation. Or if you're up to it, like maybe go out to lunch with somebody that you haven't connected with in a while. Or like call your mom and tell her you love her. You know, it's the little things. And then before you know it, you're going to feel more able and willing to do the medium-sized things, like go to a party or go to a wedding or, go to a meetup. And it can spiral.
Yeah. You know what that makes me think a lot of too is I think a lot of times when we get really caught up with fears and doubt and like lack of trust is when we're internalizing and we're in our own heads and we're not present. So we're like, they call anxiety and OCD and kind of like lack of trust being more of an internal issue. Because again, you're thinking, you're ruminating, you're potentially doing coping mechanism or coping skills or compulsions, things like that, but you're kind of in your own head. I think when you're out and connecting with others, it's much easier to be present and, outward driven, not inward driven in a way, which again, that gets a little philosophical, but if you're kind of in your own head, that gets tricky. And there was a study on IBS specifically that looked at mindfulness-based stress reduction. I covered it in my book. And again, mindfulness-based stress reduction is really like an acceptance-based model. So it's looking at your present moment and not judging or assessing it, which can also be a really good practice. So when it comes to like a nervous system standpoint, so if you have a symptom, it's kind of like, well, today I, ate a food. I had a little bit of a symptom. It kind of is what it is. And maybe I'll like give myself a little extra TLC today, but I'm not going to like take it much beyond here. I'm just kind of accepting that this is where I'm at. And it's not necessarily accepting that you're always going to have these symptoms. It's more like accepting that this is the current moment that you're in.
Well, think of it this way. Maybe look at your situation and try to be the most boring reporter on planet Earth. Right? So like whatever, I don't know, C-SPAN, whatever you think is the most boring channel on television, take that experience and like suck out all the personality out of it, and then have that reporter report on your day. Like, okay, Jennifer or whoever tried green beans. Then Jennifer got bloated an hour later. And, her kids came home from school and they did this, and like just the facts, man. Just boom, 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 like almost like you're populating a spreadsheet, boring ass, dry facts. And don't let yourself go into the mode of like a super sensationalized news reporter, and then this happened, and oh my God. And, like we've all seen the news enough times to know that there are clickbaity, sensationalized,
right,
scare the bejesus out of you to try to get you to tune in more frequently kind of news reporting. And then there's the dry as toast stuff that'll put you to sleep. Like, try to report on your day and look at it as just the facts and take away, again, the judgment. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Are you a bad person, or are you dumb because you tried a food that you shouldn't have tried? And woe is you, slap on the wrist. Like, try to take all of that emotion and judgment out of it when you're assessing your situation, I guess.
Yeah. And I think it's tricky when you've been wired that way. But again, like I said, this particular study, they had people practicing this, and there's a lot of like self-compassion that's worked into mindfulness-based stress reduction too. But there was a 71% response rate in an IBS population to doing this for 3 months. And you could potentially, I'd have to figure out the name of the study. I'd have to click my links. But I'm sure if you looked up mindfulness-based stress reduction for IBS, it's probably a study that'll come up. But one like passage from that paper that's helpful is this is from the paper. The cultivation of present moment awareness allows one to experience and intentionally respond to what is present rather than reacting automatically to thoughts, emotions, and internal sensations using a conditioned pattern. So kind of what your typical response is. This may autopilot. This may cultivate a sense of confidence that one can stay in the present moment with unpleasant stimuli, thereby decreasing the perceived threat. So maybe the perceived threat of what bloating means. If you can kind of just leave it there without kind of putting too much attention on it. This ability may also serve as an exposure technique and may promote self-regulation and lessen the tendency to focus on thoughts about the future, leading to worries and catastrophizing. So this is pulled directly from that paper.
And it almost...
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, it kind of brings up this idea, and I've seen this a handful of times. Sometimes people are very, very, very avoidant with their symptoms. So for example, like I remember I worked with somebody, and anytime she had any pain or bloating or tummy symptoms, she was like glued to TikTok or a tablet and just like sucked into a device for potentially an hour or more until the tummy pain subsided. And I remember we talked a bit about like, she had been through a lot, arguably. And I had approached it as like, hey, this is kind of a trauma response, in my opinion, not as a mental health professional, but like this type of hardcore avoidance pattern where you're like desperately trying to escape anytime there's a symptom or anytime something happens. Like, you can only run away for so long. And I don't think that that's telling your vagus nerve that you're safe.
Right.
And, I had suggested maybe doing something like accelerated resolution therapy or neuroemotional technique or something like that to try to help her nervous system cope. I don't know if she ended up doing that. It may be a little bit too soon to tell if she did. I hadn't checked in with her in a while, but yeah, it's like, when you do that, you're telling your body, oh, that thing that's happening in our body right now, it's really, really scary, and we have to avoid it at all costs, and like we can't trust it, and we just have to totally dissociate from our body right now until it is safer to come back to the body.
It's like the opposite of trusting your body to move through the pain or move through the discomfort.
Well, and that's what you were just saying, is like showing your body and showing your nervous system that you are able to be present and feel sensations even when those sensations are unpleasant or painful or unwanted.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I think, again, avoidance to me is, you can label it a coping mechanism, or again, like in the OCD space, it's labeled as a compulsion. Like if you're avoiding something, it's a compulsory behavior to try to not have discomfort. So it is really interesting, again, how much our community avoids. You know, the obvious one is foods that could potentially cause symptoms. But I think the key with most people in the IBS space is being okay with some symptoms. I think if you can, again, which is very difficult if you've been avoidant for a while, but I find that the people that can start to kind of embrace in a way that there might be some variation in symptoms as they try new things, and they kind of like run more towards some of the fear that they have around foods. You know, if they can kind of just be like, hey, I can handle it. I can handle some discomfort along the way, because I'm focusing on long-term goals, not like avoiding any potential symptom. Because that's going to always keep someone stuck if they're want to avoid or resist the potential of any symptom. And I find that a lot of people in the IBS space, SIBO space, make a lot more progress when they can come to terms that like it's probably unrealistic to think you can make progress without having any discomfort or any symptoms.
Well, a great metaphor that I heard for this really recently actually is if you sign up for the football team, you have to be okay with getting hurt potentially.
Right.
Like you're not allowed to be the quarterback of the Bengals and go onto the field and be like, I'd better not get tackled today. Like that, if you're in the game, you might get bruised up a little bit. And that means in the IBS space that you might have good days and bad days. You might be really bloated. You might have diarrhea. You might go days without pooping. And like, it's going to be a bit of a roller coaster ride. But this actually segues into the final point I wanted to make, which is, first, can I get your permission to potentially conflict with something that we already said earlier in this episode, but I think I'm going to make it clear as I talk about it?
Sure. Please.
Okay. So remember how we started off and we were like, don't seek reassurance outside of yourself and like, don't do that. I'm going to say that another option for helping with this is working with another person, like a professional like you or I, or having somebody in your support team who you can really trust. And here's what I'm thinking about this. I'm not saying that your spouse or your cousin Sandy or your provider needs to give you constant reassurance. So I'm not asking you to ask your provider at every single appointment, are you sure you could help me? Am I just doomed? Am I ever going to get through this? Like, no. But if there is an individual thought or an individual belief that you smell might be a little bit bullshitty and you're trying to assess, like, can I really trust this belief that I have, or is it the anxiety bullshitting me right now? You could ask, and I'll give an example. So I was working with a young woman, really bad anxiety and very clear case of OCD. I told her that the first day I met her. And I think a lot of it for her is that her parents bestowed a lot of this onto her and bestowed a lot of like bullshitty food fear and like medical fear into her. And so as we kind of work together, you know, I have my patients do the prokinetic speed dating and we'll sometimes try probiotics and we were introducing foods. And I remember this one specific scenario, and she has since started on anxiety medication. And last I knew, she was doing a lot better with the help of the anxiety meds. But I remember there was one moment, I don't know how it even came up, but we were in an appointment and she mentioned that when she's in the shower and she uses her bar of soap to clean her, like her crotch and butt, basically, that then she starts getting really, really freaked out that the bar of soap is not clean and it has bacteria because it was just touching her butt. And she like wants to potentially throw that bar of soap away after a single use because it's no longer clean. And she brought this up, and I'm glad she did, because I was able to pretty quickly tell her, oh, no, sweetie, that's the anxiety telling you that. Like, no, because it's soap. The whole point of soap is that it washes away and kills the germs. And like, that's the whole deal with it. Like, that bar of soap is totally fine. But again, it's like, she didn't ask me for reassurance in that moment. She wasn't asking for me to comfort her in that moment, but she had this one little belief, and she was starting to become self-aware enough that she was like, I feel like this is true, but also I'm starting to recognize my own anxiety tendencies, and like, maybe I'll just ask Dr. Geneza this. And I, somebody who she trusts and was like a member of her team, I was able to tell her, no, you don't have to worry about that.
Right. Well, I think that's a little bit different than like constant reassurance seeking. I think, again, like even like from my standpoint, if I had kind of a different theme or sort of a different OCD thread that was kind of running in my brain, I might bring that up to the provider that I'm working with, and they might be like, oh yeah, this is just like kind of morphing themes, and you get a little bit of reassurance. I think, again, it's just when it becomes constant and there's no building your own resilience to move through discomfort and move through fears, where it becomes problematic. And I will say too, sometimes having a provider that you trust, where you can focus on the things you need to be focused on. So, and sometimes when people have been stuck in more of this place where they're not trusting their gut, they're kind of in a low place, they don't even know where to focus their energy. So it's very easy for them to stay locked in those like thought spirals and fears and doubts and not know what action to take first. And I do think that that's where a provider who's knowledgeable can be really helpful, is helping you figure out maybe what actions make sense to take first, like what might you get the most benefit from starting out. Yeah, prioritizing your journey, keeping you focused on the right things. And again, there could be things that just naturally come up that we can sort of see as fear and be like, hey, like, I know this is coming up, but continue to focus on this. Like, you can kind of help redirect focus where someone needs to be focusing on, which I think is really important. And hopefully, if you trust your provider too, which is a good thing, you're not going to be, again, ruminating or, Googling or investigating so much, which I also think is very important. If you feel like you're doing that and you're working with a provider, that gets tricky. If you feel like you're still trying to like solve your case while working with a provider, that can be counterproductive.
Well, it's like that expression, too many chefs in the kitchen,
right?
Make for a shit meal, or whatever the rest of the expression is. I don't know. I'm sure that's not it. But it's like if you have 5 chefs all trying to cook the same meal at the same time, it's going to turn out like garbage, because they all have different techniques and recipes, and they're going to be like fighting each other with the spatulas. So, if one of the chefs is you and one of the chefs is a provider, you're mucking things up more than you realize.
Right.
And actually, when I re-recorded FODMAP Freedom last year, one of the very first things I did was I built it. It's the very first video. Module 0, video 1 is me telling my students, congratulations, you are now forbidden from Googling or researching or going on PubMed or going in Facebook groups or Reddit threads for the next 100 days. Yeah. And part of it is like, kind of energetically, I want to take that burden off of them. But also, I don't want them to Google weird ass shit. And, and the fun thing is too, like, I had a student this last run, and she comes, no joke, she comes to like the week 10 Q&A. And she randomly asks if camel milk can help with SIBO. No exaggeration. And before I get into the answer, it occurred to me, I had this epiphany, and I was like, oh, hey, so-and-so, are you still in those goddamn Facebook groups? Like, did you not listen to the very first video in this program? And I gave her shit, and I called her out on it, and she confessed. To her credit, she said, yeah, I'm still in the groups. And I gave her a coaching moment.
You gave her hell.
I did. I gave her hell. And I said, you have to leave those freaking Facebook groups and Reddit threads right now, today. Like, because this is an individual, we had talked a lot about anxiety and sleep. And up until that point, she had not worked on addressing either of those things that I think were driving the majority, if not all of her symptoms. And it's like, I'm sorry, do you think that you can sleep like shit and have massive anxiety that you're not managing? And then you're just going to drink camel milk and that's going to cure you of SIBO? Like, what universe does that make sense? But anyway, so I think that's the glory of working with somebody too, is that if they're a good coach and if you have a good rapport with them, hopefully they can call you out on your bullshit when you need to hear it.
Right.
So that's
very true.
Added bonus. But I know we need to wrap up though, because my very pregnant friend has a group coaching call to get on herself. And I promised her that I would give her enough time to relieve her pregnant lady bladder that's probably getting squished to hell by this baby right now. So without further ado, let's let this poor woman pee, and we will catch you in the next episode of the IBS Freedom Podcast.